The death of Dr. Death. This story shocked Germany in 2008 when the nurse Nils Hegel, nicknamed Dr. Death, was suspected of killing a patient by administering a lethal dose of medicine. However, Germans did not anticipate that the so-called Death Doctor could potentially be the most prolific murderer in Europe. Currently, he is suspected of committing 106 murders, though this list may not be exhaustive. Subsequent investigations revealed that Hegel routinely administered lethal doses of drugs to his patients. And he did it not for the sake of goodwill but for their glory, so that, for the sake of glory, he could heroically revive them at the last moment and boast of their success to their colleagues. However, experiments failed most often, people died, but the killer could no longer stop. To prove his guilt, investigators conducted 174 exhumations, but many possible victims were cremated. The investigation believes that, in fact, Hegel could have killed at least 300 people. Nils Hegel was born in 1977 into a very ordinary German family in the town of Wilhelmshaven. His father worked as a nurse at a local hospital. His mother was a stubborn woman. According to the classmates' memories, Nils did not stand out in any way, except that he was some kind of grumpy. The truth is, the boy entertained himself a little strangely. For hours, in complete solitude, he listened to the radio, tuned to the police wave, imagining himself as a cool gangster who always cleverly escapes from police traps. After school, Nils decided to get a profession as a nurse in a college at the Wilhelm Hospital. He could not go to study as a doctor. For this, he needed money, which the family never had. Therefore, Nils decided to work as a nurse first, gain experience, save money, and then think about the medical institute. In 1998, after finishing his studies, he went to the Red Cross clinic. Then he went to work as a nurse and assistant anesthesiologist in the cardiology department in Oldenburg. However, soon Hegel was persecuted. His father died of a heart attack. Then his pregnant wife died in a car crash. Obviously, it was then that he decided to avenge the whole world, killing those who, in his opinion, did not deserve the love of his loved ones. Hegel remembered his first victim very well. She was 63-year-old Brigitte Arndt, who entered the clinic with an arrhythmia diagnosis. The woman came with her daughter, who did not even pay attention to Nils, and he unnoticed before the operation gave the patient medicine, from which she died on the way to the operating room. Immediately after the first murder, Hegel was afraid that he would be caught. He shuddered in his own shadow and shuddered in any rustle. The criminal always thought that he had left some traces, but time passed. No police came for him, and then Nils realized that he had found the perfect environment for an unpunished hunt for his victims. Subsequently, the court psychiatrists who investigated the maniac assumed that Nils was simply killing because of boredom, hence his mortal experiences. The nurse was interested in whether this particular patient would die from overdosing on the drug or not, whether he would be caught, or whether he managed to develop the perfect method of killing. If the murder of a 63-year-old woman had been investigated and revealed, further deaths could have been avoided. However, no one even thought that someone could have deliberately given an elderly woman a lethal dose of the drug. It was at that moment that Nils Hegel felt the taste of impunity. However, colleagues still noticed that the mortality in the intensive care unit during his work practically doubled. True, these suspicions at first somehow went into the shade against the background of the fantastic skill with which Hegel literally pulled out the patients from that world. Doctors were able to assess the incredible clarity with which the nurse was doing his job. He was even nicknamed the Rambo Resuscitator. However, in this skill, nothing surprising was equal, because only Nils knew what drugs he was giving to the patient and what to do. And of course, no one guessed that these very situations were deliberately provoked. Nevertheless, the bad talk about Hegel still went on. All these rescue cases looked so strange. In the end, colleagues made it known about these incidents and the administration of the hospital. However, Nils was not reported to the police. He was not even fired but simply asked to leave voluntarily in exchange for promising to give a brilliant characteristic. And soon, located not far from the village of Oldenburg, Delmenhorst, a certain nurse arrived, having such impressive recommendations that the clinic's management had no choice but to hire him right away. In addition, in conversations with new colleagues of Hegel, the employees of the Albera hospital praised him with heat and dust without paying for praise. The killer worked longer in the Delmenhorst. His modus operandi here has not changed. He found elderly patients or those who suffered from particularly serious diseases and injected a giant dose of strong agents, usually used in severe cases of hypertonia or arrhythmia. To prevent the effect of the drug from being detected immediately, he turned off the life support system and heart rate and blood pressure sensors, and then just sat and waited for the death of the victim. The drugs caused the strongest heart attacks or even a heart attack, and the patient died, sometimes in the hands of Hegel himself, who, with all his might, pretended to be fighting for the life of the patient. For a long time, the nurse remained under suspicion. This is even despite the fact that of the 411 deaths recorded in this hospital during Hegel's work, 321 were on duty. The killer was caught right on the scene of the crime, committed by accident. On June 24, 2005, a nurse at the Delmenhorst City Hospital entered the ward of one of the patients and, surprised, saw her colleague Nils Hegel leaning over him, who had nothing to do in this ward. And this was not the only strange thing. The nurse found that the life support systems were turned off, and there were 4 empty ampoules of the drug on the table that no one had prescribed to the patient. She was alarmed, and just in case she took blood from the patient for analysis, the results came the next day. A dangerous concentration of a strong heart drug was found in the patient's blood. However, by that time he had already died. The clinic employee immediately reported her suspicions to the doctor. They discussed the situation and decided to report the suspicious death to the police. However, the nurse herself was allowed to finish the shift. Amazingly, during this time, Nils managed to kill another patient. He was arrested only 2 days later. In 2008, Hegel was sentenced to 7 years in prison for attempted murder. In 2012, Hegel told his cellmate that he had actually killed a lot of people. He told the prison director about this conversation. And a new investigation began against Nils. In early June 2019, the Oldenburg court recognized Nils Hegel as guilty of the murder of 85 patients and sentenced him to life imprisonment. The center of attention of investigators was also the hospital's responsible staff, where N had concrete evidence that Hegel killed patients but preferred to keep silent so as not to spoil the reputation of the clinic. 2 former senior doctors and hospital administrators soon appeared before the court on charges of murder by interference. In 2005, when Hegel was arrested, the newspapers came up with a variety of quite predictable nicknames for him. Angel of Death, Medical Officer Murderer. He was killed, as they now consider it, not because he wanted to become famous as a reanimator, but, more precisely, not only because of this. Hegel is a narcissist in his most terrible form. He not only wanted to become famous, he was also interested in the game itself. He liked that he decides who to live, who to die, and who to resurrect from the dead. He liked to play God. And the lawyers, on the contrary, assured the jury that the doctor of death seemed to feel pity for his victims. He killed them because he didn't want them to suffer in hospital wards, fading away every day from hopelessness and the inability to overcome the disease. It was nonsensical, but some of the jury even felt sorry for him. According to psychologists, it was all the stress. His father died of a heart attack. Well, maybe that's the way it is. When he saw how tenderly his daughter took care of her mother, a wave of black envy literally whacked him in the head. As if he ripped him with his head. As if the inner voice in his head were screaming, "Why does everything come from him, and you only suffer poverty, unbearable pain, and suffering?" But then the thirst for revenge in his soul seemed to be over, leaving only a bitter hull of disappointment. And Nils became just boring. I wonder if this patient will die from overdosing on medicine or not. Will he be caught, or has he developed the perfect method of murder?